Well, that's a nice collection of bottles. Hi, welcome back to St Blazey Model World. I thought I'd take this opportunity to show you through some of the stuff that I'm using at the moment, at least on my model journey. There's a range of things in front of us, so we'll just take you through some of them and explain what they are and how and when I use them. And so I suppose a good place to start with is with the largest container of all that you can see here, and this is a PVA glue. This particular one comes from B&Q and it's marketed under the name of Dial, and I use this either neat or in a sort of 50-50 mix. I don't really dilute it any further than 50-50 unless I'm using it to provide a sort of sealant for a baseboard construction, and then I'll probably apply 2 or even 3 coats, and I'll start with a 25% mix of PVA and 75% water, then go to 50-50 and then go to 75% PVA, 25% water. When I'm using scatter or scenery or grass or other such things, I tend to apply this neat. I think it's the best way to do it. It does more or less guarantee you a fix, and you can then treat it afterwards, the area that you've worked on, with a variety of different things. But that's what I use, and that's how I use this particular product. Mod Podge. Sounds like fun, doesn't it? This is comes in either a matte or a gloss form, and I've got the matte version here, and that refers to the finish that you get when the product is dry. And you use this really to give you a final sort of top coat before you apply any scenic scatters to the diorama that you're building. Mod Podge is of a similar consistency to PVA, and I tend to apply both of those products with an old paintbrush, get a good thick coat, and it gives you a good surface to work on from hence. Right, polyfiller. I'm a great fan of polyfiller. I know that you can buy plaster of Paris and sculptor mould and all sorts of other products, but I really like polyfiller because you can form hills and other sort of landscape features in quite a unique way. This is the powdered polyfiller. The ready mix polyfiller doesn't lend itself quite so well, in my experience, to scenic work. The other advantage with the powdered form is that you can mix it up into either quite a stiff mix or make it kind of loose if you want something that's a bit more free flowing, like a covering of a hill. So that's how I use this. The other thing with polyfiller is that once it sort of starts to go off, if you either use your hands with some water on, or even some shaping implements like the mini trowels that you can buy that clay moulders use, sculptors use, you can again get quite a range of features built into your diorama, and it really isn't possible with some of the other products that are out there. So I'm a great believer in it, and this particular one is a polycell, but I use any of these polyfillers as long as they come in the powder. So what else am I using these days? Well, primer. We have to have primer. As you probably realise by now, I do a lot of code 3 work, and this is the primer that I use. I always go for light coloured primers. I don't favour the red primer. White is my first choice, and then they do a beige primer nowadays, and if I can't get white, I use that. If I'm doing buildings, certain types of buildings, I might use a grey, but preferably white. And as long as it's a decent quality primer, you can't really go far wrong. Right, moving on, Scenic Scatters. This is just symbolic really. This particular one happens to be a Woodland Scenic Scatter, blended turf. But I use a range of them, and often I'll mix them up as well, because I don't particularly like the uniform sterile appearance that I've seen on some dioramas. And what I'll do when I've used a scatter, which will be blended in the first place, so I might have this blended turf mixed with something else, so it's more of a hybrid blend, if you will. What I'll do with that is that will get scooped up and put into a pot mixed with other colours of Scenic Scatter. If you're a regular on this channel, you'll know from what I've said so far and some of the things I showed you, I don't really like the over sterile approach of some model making. And mixing up your blends and your scatters and some of your paints to get different colours with different shades, to me it's much more appealing than a uniform colour spread over a particular area. And generally I hold that to be true whatever type of model making I'm doing. There are one or two exceptions, and we'll come to them later in another video. With these next two items I was umming and ahhing whether to include them in tools and equipment or in this video, and I've gone for this video. Two things I could not live without: cotton buds and cocktail sticks. Cotton buds, I use them a lot, applying small patches of detail to scenic areas. I use them for cleaning out airbrushes. I just cannot explain how important they are to my craft, to what I do. And you get what you buy, and you know, in recent times we've all had to make sacrifices in our buying choices, but I tend, if I can, to buy the one that you can see now, the Johnson's one. For me, they just hold together a little bit better than some of the cheaper brands. The cocktail sticks, again, to me, priceless. I use them in all sorts of areas, particularly I find for fine detailing painting situations. The fact that they have a fixed tip on them, not a collection of brushes, but a fixed tip, means that I can apply paint very accurately in very small amounts on specific areas of a model. And of course, I have to say, for me personally, with the bulk of what I do, that applies to model vehicles, and for those they are invaluable. I use them all the time. I have boxes and boxes of them, and if you've never tried painting detail with a cocktail stick rather than a brush, I recommend highly that you give it a try. Sewing machine oil, I couldn't really get by without it. I find it's an excellent lubricant for model motors, fine scale models and motors. It's a light oil, doesn't really stain the bodywork of anything too much, and again, it's just one of those things that I really couldn't live without. I use it on my Tamiya truck that we'll have a look at down the line in one of these videos. I use it on model railway locos, and there are some other applications where I use it as well. For me, far superior to the ever well-known water dispersant 40. It's just far superior for what I do, for what I need. I'm sure other products have their uses, but in the world of model making and model engineering, model servicing, a light general purpose oil like this is absolutely invaluable. Liquid products, couple of things again I couldn't really do without in my world. Airbrush Cleaner, this particular one, a Vallejo one on the left hand side there, I use a lot of that. It's important to clean the airbrushes properly. They'll last you a lifetime, and even if you're starting with a low cost airbrush such as the ones that I reviewed recently, and I'll put a tag to that on the screen, you must look after these things to give them the best chance they can of serving you well over the years and delivering the best results when you actually come to use them. The product on the right, and this list grows even more bizarre now, is nail polish remover. I use this in a range of situations, but mainly to remove decals or decals that are tampo printed onto modern model vehicles, and we'll give you a demonstration of that somewhere in the near future as well. Having started this film by talking about PVA, I think it's only right now that we look at plastic cement, or polystyrene cement as it's sometimes called. On the recent Code 3 project that I did use a Humbrol poly cement. You'll be familiar with this if you're starting out. It comes in tubes. Often you get a tube of this included with the basic model kits that are out there in the market. I'm not a great fan of them, and I much prefer the Tamiya or any of the liquid cements. I'm a bit of a Tamiya fan, I have to say. So that's the product that I use, and I'll show you that in more detail very shortly. On the right hand side I've got some model filler, and this particular one happens to be Humbrol. Again, in the difficult times we're in at the moment, we buy what we can find. Nothing wrong with this model filler, I've used it before, and it's very good for filling the poor joins that you can sometimes get in pre-pressed plastic kits, but I use it in a range of other situations as well. And again, on my recent Code 3 I used it to fill in a hole on the upper deck of my model bus that I was building for that project, and it works very well, dries nicely, you can sand it down, smooth it down, takes paint very well as well, and it's just a nice product to have. And if you want to improve the finish of any of model kits that you build, I highly recommend that you buy either this particular product or something like it. So the Tamiya glue, liquid cement, and if you can see there, it's actually quite liquid in the bottle, and when we unscrew it, we've got a brush attached, and it just flows nicely off that brush, and it allows you to apply small amounts of cement in fine detail on small item pieces and get a very good bond. And that's why I tend to go for that type of glue rather than something that comes out of a tube. I suppose lastly we need to talk a little bit about paint. There are 1, 2, 3, 4 variations of paint here. On the right hand side, the brown stuff, that's a bog standard ready mixed craft shop type children's type paint, just a general brown colour, and I use that all the time. Not necessarily that shade, but a lot of it. When you create a diorama, you have to remember that the diorama might become chipped or damaged if it's going to be moved around frequently. So I use this as a base coat to make sure that we don't get any white polyfiller or polystyrene or PVA or anything else coming through. On the left hand side we've got an aerosol can, and that particular one is a Railmatch. It's a sleeper grime. I use that quite a lot too, and not just on track, but I tend to use it on buildings and vehicles also, where I'm applying some weathering. I find it's a very good product, dries nicely. You do need to allow adequate ventilation when you're using that. It's a polyurethane paint as opposed to an acrylic type paint, and it works very well. You can buy that at well-known auction sites on the internet, a number of suppliers of that. Also a Railmatch product is the small tub on the right hand side. Now this is an acrylic product, and this particular one, I'm not sure if it's Railmatch Sleeper Grime or Railmatch Roof Dirt. It'll be one or the other, because I only tend normally to buy those two for most of the work that I do. To the left of that we have a blue and a yellow. They are both Tamiya acrylic paints, and as I've already said in this video, I am a great fan of some of the Tamiya products. These acrylic paints work very well straight out of the jar with a brush. If you want to put them through an airbrush, I suggest you dilute them a little bit, probably about 50-50 actually, or certainly 75% paint, 25% water. Bring them down a little bit. You can buy a specific thinner, and I use that sometimes, but you can thin them with water. And for some of my work I like the way in which the water reduces the opacity of the colour. It's not so vibrant when it goes onto a model, and for some of the things that I do, that's important to achieve a realistic effect. The very last paint I'm going to look at in this video is the small yellow tub right at the very front there. That's a Phoenix Precision paint. That particular one happens to be National Bus Company Cherry Red, and you can buy these through well-known internet auction sites as well. They're relatively expensive for the amount that you get, but of course remember that if you're going to put those through an airbrush, you are going to dilute them, and I find they work very well. Once again, they are a enamel polyurethane paint. Cleaning of your equipment will require some kind of sharp cleaner, such as the Vallejo Airbrush Cleaner that I use, or if it's a brush, White Spirit will work just as well. I can't really let this review of the products that I'm using at the moment end without Modrock. I've been using Modrock for 35 years roundabout. That sounds awful, doesn't it? But it's true. If you are of a certain age and you fell off your bike and you broke your wrist or your arm or even your leg and went along to the casualty department, this is what they use to create your plaster to help you recover. I don't think they use it now. Forgive me, I'm not in the medical world. I think they use fiberglass or something similar, but certainly many years ago this is what they would have used, and it's basically a fabric with dry plaster built into the mesh of it, and I'll show you a piece very shortly. And they would wet it down and apply it layer by layer, and that would build your plaster. I use it on certainly 70% of the dioramas that I build. So there is a piece of dry Modrock. It comes in strip form, or if you buy it in larger pieces you can always cut it up dry, and all you do with this really is to soak it into some water for a minute. 60 seconds is fine, and then apply it onto the scenic area that you're working on. And the principle is much the same as paper mache. You build up layer by layer, and you can achieve very realistic effects with this. When you are applying this, you might find that you get creases in it or overlaps if you're applying several layers, and I know that some model makers smooth those out. I tend to leave them in personally. I don't mind the ridges being in there, and again, for me it just adds an extra touch of realism. But that's Modrock. Well, there we are. That's just a selection really of some of the things that I'm using at the moment to build my scenery. If I made this video in a year's time, who knows where the list might differ. We are where we are, and this is what I prefer to use currently. As usual, I'd like to thank you for viewing this video. Please remember to subscribe, and you'll find the icon there, and if you click the bell icon as well, you'll get an alert every time I release a new video. Thanks for viewing. Take care in these still difficult times. Bye for now.